Thank you, Senator Carton. Senator Kaine, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and to the witnesses. If I had 10 minutes of questioning, I'd spend 5 comparing a Biden administration that has assembled a global coalition to stand for democracy against an illegal invasion, and a previous administration that illegally withheld congressionally mandated arms sales to Ukraine to extort a political advantage by doing so. But I have 4 minutes and 39 seconds. And so I'm going to take 2 minutes, Dr. Lin, with you on a question about China and diplomacy, and then 2 minutes with Dr. Hill and Mr. Zakheim about an allies reference, picking up on some of your verbal testimony. Dr. Lin, in the events surrounding this spying balloon incident, the thing that has troubled me the most is not the capacity of a high-altitude balloon. I've probably been troubled most by General Austin trying to call his counterpart in China and no one picking up the phone. What does it say about the diplomatic relationship as an expert that that's happening, and what do we need to do so that we have, at a minimum, clear channels of communication to avoid unnecessary escalations?
Senator Kaine, that's an excellent question. I'm not surprised that Secretary Austin's counterpart did not pick up the phone. We have a track record of us reaching out to the PLA and them not picking up the phone or responding at a much later time where it's no longer relevant to the situation that we are trying to deal with. It shows that across the U.S. engagement with China, our military-to-military ties and relationship is relatively weak. And despite the efforts of this administration to focus on deconflictions, crisis communications with the PLA, we have not made significant progress. And I wouldn't fault that to be on the U.S. side. I would fault that to be the Chinese. From their perspective, they have very little incentives to communicate or deconflict from us because they view our attempts to communicate with them as either allowing or greenlight certain types of U.S. operations.
Don't they, though, value stability, and they wouldn't like surprises or accidents or miscalculations that weren't in their sort of intentional interest?
They do value that, but we have seen since 2021 that they've canceled the military maritime consultative agreement, the key military-to-military dialogues to prevent unsafe encounters and whatnot. I think from the Chinese perspective, they believe that if they can reach an agreement with the United States at the highest strategic level on how the relationship should be framed, all the other elements should fall in line, which is why, from their perspective, they're very intent on constructing this framework of U.S.-China relations, which, from the U.S. perspective, that's only one piece of the relationship.
Right. Thank you. To Dr. Hill and Mr. Zakheim. Dr. Hill, you said something about I think it was in reference to American allies in the hemisphere that we pay attention to problems rather than build relationships. And Mr. Zakheim, you said we need to always focus on allies as one of the most important strengths we have against any adversary. The network of allies we have is important. I'm the chairman of the Western Hemisphere Subcommittee of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, and I see this throughout the Americas, deep Chinese involvement economically, humanitarian aid, debt deals that'll get you in trouble later, but they might be attractive up front. And what our allies tend to say to us is, we'd rather deal with you. I mean, we're culturally more connected. We're suspicious of some of the Chinese offers that are on the table. But if they've got an offer and you've got nothing, how do we say to our people, well, we're turning down the free 5G system or the port infrastructure bill? So talk a little bit about, particularly in the Americas, your thoughts about the way to turn episodic attention to problems into a more sustained effort to build relationships.
I think this is absolutely spot on, and we need a strategy because China has a strategy, and maybe they come in, as you say, in very specific ways with the Belt and Road Initiative, investments in energy in places like Venezuela, for example, coming in with other forms of assistance, targeting elites. We know that the Chinese are extraordinarily very good at honing in on elites and propping them up. Russia does exactly the same. And it's part of this top-down approach that Dr. Lin has described. They look for a framework of the relations. They start at the top, and then they let everything else flow from there. And that's not the way that we approach our allies and partners in any hemisphere, let alone in the Western Hemisphere. And when I was in the previous administration, I worried a great deal as a result of the crisis in Venezuela that we didn't have a plan, that we didn't have deep relationships. We took a lot of the other neighboring countries for granted, and we didn't have deep relationships.
Could I let Mr. Zakheim, we've identified the problem, and he'll give us the solution.
Oh. No pressure there, Senator. I do think the answer here is diplomacy that Dr. Hill's speaking about. Brazil was raised before, and President Biden's engagement, I think, is absolutely critical. Trade and commerce. And this is what needs to grow. That is what we do best as a country. Unleash our free market. We've tried this and success and failed over the decades, but that continues to be worked aggressively. And I think looking at Colombia, I think there's a layer where a security relationship appropriately tailored for the country can have a positive impact in terms of the type of